This is episode 65 of the 99 Forever podcast. I'm Eric Friesen, and my guest tonight is making his debut on the show. He's a contributor for heavyhockey.com and the number one Buffalo Sabres fan in Alberta, Jeff Ade. Jeff, how's it going tonight, man?
It's going good, Eric. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, I mean, it's got to be going good, right? Your team just beat the Leafs.
Yeah, no, that was a great game. Came back. They were down 2-1 starting the third period and ended up winning it 4-3. So you got to love those kind of things deep in the season in a playoff race. Alex Tuck got 2 goals. He's got 30 on the year now, and lots of positives to take from that.
Oh, definitely. I mean, I wish my Oilers would have had a little more luck on the weekend and got the win in Toronto, but you know, it's a tough building to go into, and it's good that your team was able to steal a win there, especially considering they're in a playoff race right now, and doing it against a division rival, it never hurts.
Yeah, no, that's for sure. And those games against Toronto, they're always exciting. A big rival game, and feels like everybody hates Toronto, the center of the universe, right? So always good to get those wins against the Leafs.
Yeah, you don't have to tell me about hating the Leafs or anyone in oil country for that matter. Um, and we had a chance to actually meet for the first time last weekend when we were both playing in the 2023 Heavy Hockey Showdown. Actually, there was a picture on Twitter of you defending me in front of the net, and it actually caused a few people to comment if it was a penalty or not. And I jokingly said that it wasn't. It's all good, but I just thought that was kind of funny.
Yeah, no, it's good. We talked for all these months and everything like that, and it's good to get a chance to meet in person. And I think the first time you and I met would have been just on the ice when we were squaring off against each other.
Yeah,
Like,
exactly.
hey, nice to meet you. How's it going? And I was playing defense there, and we're battling in front of the crease, and it was lots of good times though. So it was a great put on that event for the Sexual Assault Center of Edmonton, and it's for a good cause. We've been talking for months, like I said, and some of these people we've been talking for years, and it's good to get a chance to put a face and a voice to these people and get to see them in person and hang out, right? So it was a really good weekend last weekend. I'm glad we got to make it happen.
Oh, for sure. And I mean, some of the guys that I played with, I did know them in the past. I mean, of course, Michael Abair and Mike Durst are two guys that I've known for a long time. But I've had Dash on the podcast a couple times, and we talk on Twitter all the time. Well, that was my first time meeting him. I was meeting you as well, and you see a few familiar faces from the event in years past when it was still um, under the Oilers live banner. Before the pandemic, of course. So yeah, to have the Oilers Live Cup kind of turn into this new event now, and just sort of keep the tradition going of raising money for a good cause. And of course, there aren't many better causes than raising money for sexual assault victims and survivors. It was a great weekend overall.
Yeah, no, well said. I can't wait to the future because it's going to be an annual event, and I look forward to next year's event.
Oh, without a doubt, man. And like you said, I mean, we kind of skated over to each other for the first time and said, "Oh, hey, how's it going? Like, we'll have to do the podcast next week."
Yeah.
So, yeah, that was cool, man. Well, look, we're gonna talk a lot about the Sabres tonight. We're gonna get into some Oilers too. But before we do that, I just want to find a little bit about your own background as a hockey fan and Sabres fan specifically. So let's just start right at the beginning. When did you start following hockey, and how did you become a Sabres fan?
Yeah, no, we'll take the life trip and everything like that. And I've been a huge hockey fan since as long as I can remember. I started playing when I was 5 years old and in kindergarten, and I feel like I was kind of like born into a hockey family as well. My older brother, who's 5 years older, he also played as well, and my dad, he used to coach my brother, and my dad also used to work for Edmonton Minor Hockey Association as well. So for about 10 years in the mid 90s to the early 2000s, my dad was the novice director for all of Edmonton. So it was up to him to kind of tier and level out the playing field throughout the all the different levels of novice throughout the whole city. So my dad was always kind of in different rinks watching hockey, and I was always sometimes just following him. So hockey's always been a part of my whole life, just from my dad, my brother, just always playing myself. And as for the Sabres thing, well, it is a little weird because, yeah, I'll admit I am born and raised in Edmonton. I'm an Edmontonian, my whole entire life. But I don't know, just my dad and my brother are diehard Oiler fans, and as a kid, I always kind of I always kind of had this little attitude. Well, just because I was born here doesn't mean I have to just automatically start cheering for them, right?
Yeah.
So I was kind of always rebelling a little bit and like, oh, I don't have to cheer for the Oilers, right? And I don't know. Decided on Buffalo because my mom's side of the family kind of uprooted life from Edmonton to Buffalo. So when I was a
Okay.
kid, maybe around 8 to 10 years old, my aunt married an American, and she uprooted life and left from Edmonton to Buffalo. So that's kind of how it started. When I was a kid, my aunt was joking with my dad, saying she's going to brainwash me and turn me into a Sabres fan. And well, my auntie kind of did, since I was a little like 10-year-old, she's been sending me Sabres stuff like jerseys and shirts and just any little thing you can just find in a local dollar store. You can't really
Right.
find here, right? So
So,
it's
I mean,
sorry, go
that's an
ahead.
interesting story for sure. And I mean, I think usually when you have people living in an NHL city, the majority of them are going to cheer for the hometown team. But there are plenty of instances. Like I have friends in Calgary who aren't Flames fans. And I mean, I'm sure if you go across Canada, there's going to be people who live in different cities that cheer for different teams. Like I grew up in a city that doesn't have an NHL team in Saskatoon, so here you see fans of all different teams. Although Calgary and Edmonton would probably be two of the more popular ones, especially with fans under 40, because it's so close to those cities respectively. You start to see some original six fan bases as the fans get a little bit older. Um, but for yourself, like cheering for the Sabres, do you even have like the slightest bit of allegiances to the Oilers, like when the Sabres are done in the playoffs, or are you not a fan of them at all?
See, when I was younger, I was more inclined to like um cheer for multiple teams, I guess. Like I would say the Sabres are my East team and the Oilers would be my West team, right? So I
Right.
was kind of doing like multiple teams when I was younger, but so I'm not sure how old you are, but when I was 18 years old, that was in 2006 and
I was
2000.
17 in 2006.
Right on. So you and I are roughly the same age there.
Yeah.
So yeah, I was 18 years old, and to me, that was like the big year where I was like, holy shit, I might get my dream Stanley Cup matchup. And all throughout that playoffs, I kind of had friends kind of like, oh, you got to make a decision, man. Like, what if Buffalo and Edmonton meet in the final? What are you gonna do?
Right.
So it was around 2006, and I kind of like, you know what? I got to make, I got to make a decision one way or the other, and I kind of just went for Buffalo because I figured, you know what, this team has zero championships. They still have zero today. But back then, I was like, this team has zero cups. And, it's going to mean so much to that city, so much to that organization. Like that city of Buffalo is going to just explode if and when they ever get their Stanley Cup. So
Yeah.
back in 2006, I was just like, okay, Sabres are my thing. Like, like I'm going for Buffalo all the way. And I'll admit, like, I just love hockey as a whole. And living in the city of Edmonton, as you know, like it's a hockey crazy place. Like
Hmm.
it's just yeah, hockey craze in the city. So as for the Oilers, I will admit it's sometimes where it's hit or miss. Like I try to be neutral with them, but like last season, I was lucky enough I got tickets to 4 different playoff games, and just last year I got my first like Oilers shirt in like 15 years because I was like
Okay.
I'm not going to go to a playoff game and just wear like I'm not the type. I'm not going to wear Buffalo stuff if Buffalo's not playing. And I
Right.
didn't want to go to a playoff game last year in just regular clothes. So I finally got an Oilers like shirt last year, and I own one Oilers shirt, and that's it. So I would say I'm like kind of in the middle with them, but like I got a lot of friends and family are Oilers fans, and
Oh yeah.
I don't want to be. It's sometimes, as like I said, it's a situational thing. Like sometimes just to rib or give it to my friends, like, oh, they're gonna lose tonight, or I hope they lose. But there's
Yeah, I
certain
got you.
situations, like if it's a big important game, like, all right, guys, I'll support you tonight. Like go Oilers, go. Let's see.
Yeah, no, and I think the fact that Buffalo and Edmonton are in different conferences and only play each other twice a year probably makes it a little bit easier. It's not like they're battling for the same playoff spots. And that is awesome that you were able to go to a few playoff games. I went to my first ever playoff game last spring as well. It was game one against the Kings. Do you happen to remember some of the games you went to, by the way?
Last year,
Yeah.
yeah, I went to both the games against the Kings. Sorry, the game ones and game two,
Okay, so
and
we
then I
would have been at
went
the
to
same one.
nice, and then I was lucky enough to go to both games against Colorado in games 3 and 4 as well.
Oh, nice.
So the game 4 against Colorado, where they lost in overtime, that was a rough one. I'm not gonna lie. Like
Yeah.
And like I said, I was supporting the Oilers during that playoff race because I was honestly, I was a huge fan of Jay Woodcroft. And when they made that coaching change last year, I was kind of like, you know what? I'm not the biggest Ken Holland fan, but I feel like that's a good move. Like Jay Woodcroft, I think is what this team needs. And I kind of said, like, when he started coaching it was like what, January, February last year, I was like, this is the turning point this team needs, right? So when they started going on a bit of a playoff run, I was like, yes, like Woodcroft is paying off, and it's so far so good kind of thing. So I will admit, I was hopping on the bandwagon last playoffs, you know.
Well, I mean, and I totally get that, and with the Sabres being out of the playoffs, and not to mention that, sorry about that, but I
Yeah,
mean, and the Oilers, going on their deepest run since 2006. I mean, I think probably just as an Edmontonian, easy to sort of jump on that bandwagon a little bit, and to just go back to that year for a second. I remember when the Oilers beat the Ducks in the 2006 Western Conference Final to advance to the Stanley Cup Final, and then you looked over to the east. I thought Buffalo was going to beat Carolina. So I was envisioning a Stanley Cup final between our two teams. And I'm sure you would have loved that as well, because even as expensive as I assume the tickets would have been back then, I'm sure that you would have found your way to one of those games in Edmonton if the Oilers and Sabres would have met in the final.
yeah. And back then, I only was able to go to one playoff game in Edmonton, and I won't forget it because it was actually the game they eliminated Detroit in the first round.
Oh, great.
And that
What?
was a great game because it was Steve Eiserman's last game. They had the good
Yeah.
comeback in the third period to eliminate Detroit, and that was just an amazing game to be alive. So, but yeah, as you're right, like back then, as I said, I was 18 years old, and tickets were kind of expensive, right? So I took that loss really hard to Carolina because I was just dreaming, even if I wasn't able to gonna go to games or not, I was gonna be there live, and I
Yep.
was gonna cheer on Buffalo as best I can, right? And the funny thing is, I mentioned I got family out there, and my grandpa and my aunt and a couple family members, the promise they made to me is if Buffalo won the cup, they would make sure to fly me out to Buffalo for the Stanley Cup
Oh,
parade.
wow.
So that
That
was
would have
kind of
been
the
cool
thing
to
I was
do.
hoping for. I was like, sorry, go ahead.
That would have been cool. I mean, for especially for a kid like you who is like a Sabres, number one fan in Alberta, like to get the chance to go out and take part in that parade, I'm sure you would have jumped at the chance.
Yeah, so that's what I was looking forward to. Like, I didn't think I'd be able to get tickets, but I was just, hey, if Buffalo can actually pull off a Stanley Cup win, my grandpa's like, oh, I'll help you get there, and I'm hopping on the first flight again to Buffalo. But as we all know, the Sabres didn't even make it to the final that year, and
No.
well, Carolina ended up winning the cup. So all my Oiler friends and myself, we can all hate Carolina together.
Yeah.
Eh? So it's
So because the Oilers or because the Hurricanes took out the Sabres, were you cheering for the Oilers in the final then?
yeah, 100% I was that year because it was one of those things where I didn't want to see Carolina kind of celebrate something that I felt like we should have been there, kind of thing, right?
And I
And
mean,
so I was 100% cheering for the Oilers that year. So, I was a huge fan actually of Jason Smith. He was one of my favorite Oiler players as a kid. And I just really loved Jason Smith. I wanted to see him hoist the cup at center ice there.
yeah, that would have been a dream come true. And I mean, I went to my first ever Oilers game earlier that year in April of '06, right before the playoffs. So I mean, I would have tried to make my way out there for the parade as well. I was just starting my first ever job at the time, so I wouldn't have had the money to make it to a playoff game in Edmonton at 17. I think the gas alone to drive out from Saskatoon probably would have emptied my bank account.
Yeah.
But like I said, last year I was finally able to go to a playoff game in Edmonton. I would have went at some point earlier in the past 11 years if I had been in the area, because I was living in Toronto for a while for school. The one year they did make it before that in 2017, and of course they went a decade without making the playoffs, which sort of prolonged the first playoff game for me. But no, that was a hell of a run, and I'm sure that I mean, you were living in Edmonton at the time. You know what that city would have been like if they would have actually capped it off with a cup.
Yeah, it was outrageous. And as I mentioned, I was 18 years old, and I'm not proud of a lot of my past, but I'll admit I was on White Ave and kind of having some fun sometimes. And there was some outrageous parties, but looking back, it was something you kind of always remember because you just, I don't know, sometimes as an 18-year-old, you're gonna live a little and kind of experience some things. I don't know, but
Exactly.
it was a blast. It was a blast.
I saw a lot of pictures of people climbing street lights and anything that they could stand on top of cars. It looked like a pretty wild time, but I mean, it just goes back to like what you were saying, how Edmonton is a hockey crazed city, and um, I know the Golden Bears are a perennial championship program there, and the Oil Kings have won a few WHL championships, but it's Oilers above everything else.
Yeah, 100%, 100%.
And we talked about you becoming a Sabres fan sort of in the late 90s. That probably would have lined up with right around the time when they went to the Stanley Cup final in 1999. So I just want to ask, I assume it's players from that cup run specifically, but who were some of your favorite Sabres players as a kid?
Yeah, no, you got it spot on. Around that time is that was like their heyday. And it's funny because when people ask me today, like the Sabres suck, how do you love them so much? And I'm like, hey, when I was a kid, they were a good team. And Hasek, Dominic Hasek was the main one. I was never a goalie. Like when I played growing up, I was always a center, and then when I got older, I moved to defense. But I just loved Hasek's just unique style. To me, just seeing somebody so unorthodox and so just different in the crease, I was just such a huge Hasek fan. So Hasek was I guess the main one there, and also I was a huge just also Mike Pekka fan. I thought Pekka was a great, I loved his defensive style, the Selke type of forward. He wore the C there. So Mike Pekka, Maxim Afinoganov was another one too. So they had some great names there. So they had a great team. And as for just the few favorites, I would have to go with Hasek and Pekka. Playing street hockey as a kid, I'd wear my Sabres goat head jersey with the friends there, and I would always either, if I was in net, I'd pretend to be Hasek and flopping around, or else I'd pretend to be Pekka there too. So those would be my two key ones. And it was kind of funny because in 1999, Dallas beat Edmonton in the first round, and then they beat Buffalo in the fourth round, the
Yeah.
finals. And so once again, it's like we have all these connections a little bit too with the Carolina in '06 and then Dallas in '99, and so we have some mutual enemies there too, right?
Yeah,
So
well, and as well, Mike Pekka, who was, like you said, a big part of that Sabres run in 1999. He was a bottom six forward for the Oilers in 2006. So I'm
yeah,
sure there was part of you that would have liked to see him get that cup with Edmonton as well.
yeah, no, I was a huge. It was only here for 1 year, I believe, in
He
Edmonton, but I was a
was, yeah.
huge
He
fan.
signed with the Leafs the following year.
Yeah, and it was great to see him kind of in Edmonton, and like as much as back as a kid, I was a fan of both teams, so I really loved seeing players who did go from both Edmonton and Buffalo kind of thing. And Mike Greer is another one. I love Mike Greer as a kid actually, and I remember actually meeting Mike Greer as a kid when he was an Oiler and getting his autograph, and I just always remember he was just a nice, genuine dude, and I was like, man, this guy's like a big hunking like pro hockey player, but he was just so just genuine and soft spoken to us kids. And I was like, Mike Greer is awesome. So
Yeah.
he's another guy I want to bring up because yeah, watching him as an Oiler and then later on as a Sabre, Mike Greer was another player I was a huge fan of too.
And also, I just going back to Hasek for a second. I think whether or not you were a goalie, he must have been probably the most popular Sabres player at the time. Let's not forget that he won back-to-back Hart trophies in the late 90s as a goaltender, which is almost unheard of and hasn't been done since. It's rare enough for a goalie to win the Hart Memorial Trophy as the most valuable player in the NHL, but to do it in back-to-back years during Yager's heyday when he's winning four straight Art Ross trophies, to take two of them away from him, that just shows you on what an elite level Hasek was, and that's part of the reason why some people consider him the best goalie to ever play the game.
Yeah, you nailed it spot on. Hasek's somebody that I feel a little biased too much if I would say things like that, but I am glad you mentioned it yourself, saying some look at him as the greatest goalie of all time.
Well, I think Martin Brodeur was sort of the de facto answer for a long time, but it really seems like since since Hasek, Waugh, and Brodeur all retired, and those are kind of considered like the three best goaltenders of their generation or their era. When you look back at it now, that that mentality of Brodeur being the best has sort of shifted over to Hasek a little bit. And I'm not going to take anything away from Brodeur. I mean, all-time leader in wins, shutouts, but it just seems like Hasek's getting a little more credit now than maybe he did in the past, and they're looking at what Brodeur did as maybe more of a systems thing, that he played on one of the best defensive teams ever in New Jersey and had a lot of like 20 save shutouts, whereas Hasek was, like you said, standing on his head every night and willing a less talented team than the Devils had at that time to a Stanley Cup final.
Yeah, no, you said well said there because it seemed like we were kids back then, so maybe it's tough to gauge, but it just didn't seem like Hasek got the praise that he's getting now today. You know what I mean? And well said again with the defense there because New Jersey had a really good system set up, defensive minded with guys like Scott Stevens, Scott Niedermeyer. So not trying to take anything away from Brodeur, like you said, but just he had a bit of a different situation there set up in New Jersey.
Yeah, definitely. And let's not forget also in 1998, I mean, you could argue at that time that Jaromir Jagr was the best skater in the world and Hasek was the best goaltender in the world, both playing for the Czech Republic and led the Czech Republic to a gold medal at the 1998 Winter Olympics in Nagano. So it was sort of like a perfect timing for hockey in that country to have like the best forward and the best goaltender at the same time.
Yeah, it was a great time, and they happened to eliminate Canada and all that stuff. But
That's the
there's a
tough part.
that is the very tough part, and the Olympics always get people going in a little way because sometimes you want to cheer for your players, but then your players are in a different country. So the Olympics are always fun, and I wish they can get that agreement figured out sometime soon here. But back then it was great to see Hasek kind of not only leading the way for the Sabres, but also just on a world stage too. So pretty much the whole
Mhm.
entire world could see what kind of goalie he really was and what kind of MVP he was.
Yeah, and I mean, it's tough for me as a Gretzky fan because that's the only Olympics that Wayne Gretzky was ever able to play in, and not getting to go in the shootout and everything. It was his second last year in the league. You would have loved to have seen him win one more gold for Canada. Gretzky led Canada to three straight Canada Cup victories um, in the 80s through to the early 90s, and then ended with a disappointing loss to the States in the 96 World Cup of Hockey. So would have been nice to rebound with one more championship before his career was over in 98. Um, or his last international tournament, I'm saying in 98, but just a tough break, but like you can't take anything away from that Czech team. Uh, like I said, perfect culmination of events to have Hasek and Yager both in their prime at the same time.
No, that's for sure. Yeah. So I
And
can't wait. Sure.
I'm sure you're a big fan, like you said, of the goat head jersey too. I will tell you, when I was growing up playing minor hockey in Saskatoon, we started wearing Ottawa Senators style jerseys, the ones that they wear right now. And somewhere in the early 2000s, the zone that I played in switched over to those Buffalo Sabres style jerseys, which are similar to what the Senators wear, but obviously with the silver and white accents on the side as well. So I'm still a big fan of that jersey. We wore a different logo that we were called the Saskatoon Bobcats. So the logo is different, but the jersey is identical other than that. So every time I see the Sabres wear that jersey, part of me is just like, I love to see that back because that's the uniform that I wore for about a decade playing in Saskatoon. So I love it.
That's awesome to hear. Yeah, as we mentioned, I became a fan around that era, like in the mid to late '90s, and that's
Right.
what they had. That was their logo, that was their color scheme. So I'll admit my favorite is still kind of their like the original look, but just they have so many good memories with the goat head, and like that was just so many great years. Like they only had that jersey in that color for like about 10 years, but just so many good years during that 10-year span.
Yeah, I was going to ask you that next, if you prefer the black and red and silver to the blue and gold, but I think that the Sabres will always still be linked to that original color scheme that they started with in the early 70s. But it's cool that they're able to still have that look while have this very different third jersey. You see a few teams do that, right? Like the Canucks, they wear their blue and green as their primary colors, but then they still bring back the black, gold and red look from the 90s as well. So some teams can have this completely off the board alternate jersey. The Oilers kind of have a different look. I mean, the one that they had in the early 2000s, the Todd McFarlane that they've
Yeah.
now brought back as a reverse retro, it's different enough, but it's not like the color scheme is completely different. Like blue and orange are still in it, even though they might be slightly different shades. But that jersey that the Sabres wear is completely different from their usual look.
Oh, 100%. Yeah, completely different.
And so, but to just finish up on that, you are preferring the blue and gold.
Yeah, if I had to, I'd prefer the blue and gold. To me, that's just I don't know. I feel like black's overdone a lot in sports, especially in hockey. And I feel like the blue and gold is just like that's the original, like that's the vintage from the 70s kind of thing. And I don't know, to me that just has just the more just brings more just
The
feel to
history's
the
attached to
Sabres.
it too, right?
Yeah, exactly. They're both like I said, they're both great in different ways. I just if I had to pick one or the other, I would pick the blue and gold over. But this year, I forget offhand, I should have looked it up, but their record is like phenomenally like better with the goat heads. Like they everybody's talking about they should just switch jerseys back full time with the way they've been winning compared to losing with the goat heads this year.
That's funny. I mean, you hear the same thing about the Oilers alternate jersey too, the one with no white on it. The Adidas one that they brought out about in 2019-20. So and it's not the most popular jersey with everyone. I know whenever I watch an Oilers game with my dad, he says he hates that one. But and I mean that jersey is attached to a lot of great memories for me too in the 2022 playoffs last year with the Oilers going to the Western Conference Final. Connor hitting his 100th point in 53 games back in 2020-21. So it might not be everybody's favorite, but I think there's enough important Oilers moments in the last few years that I'll always be fond of it.
Yeah, no, I'll agree. And honestly, this might be a totally different topic, but I think sometimes jerseys are a little overrated in a way because, like, at the end of the day, as long as your team wins, do you really care what they're wearing, right? So,
Exactly. I
like, I
mean,
know sometimes
uh,
other jerseys look better than others, but I feel like all we want is our team to win, right? So,
yeah, and I'll admit I am a big jersey guy, and I do think that the Oilers' current home and away set, which they wore back in the glory years, is one of the cleanest looks in the NHL.
yeah,
And the Sabres, they sort of experimented with going back to their original look a little bit, but with an updated sort of color scheme. Like before, they were wearing the dark blue and yellow with some silver in there. I like that they were trying to go back to somewhat of their original look, but I think if you're gonna go vintage, just go full vintage. Don't try to do like this updated version of it. The fans just want to see the original color scheme, and I think they got it right, going back to more of the royal blue than the navy blue that they were wearing.
yeah, no, that's a good point. Yeah, and their current jerseys are probably like my favorite, I'd say, because like you said, it's like the originals with a little just modernized like spin to it, right?
Yeah, exactly. Um, and I want to know, what do you remember about the first Sabres game you ever attended?
Ooh. See, that's I hate to say it, but I don't remember too much. I just remember I was a teenager and they were wearing their goat heads and Buffalo did win. And I do remember it would have been like in the early 2000s roughly because I remember it was well no, it was like probably 2006 actually because I think it was Ryan Miller versus UC Markkinen.
Okay.
So I remember it was like UC Markkinen versus Ryan Miller like goalie matchup and Buffalo did win. But as for like major memories, I don't remember all too much. Sorry, I was like I said, it's been many years now, holy. And
Yeah, exactly.
But the one of the main things that the stupid little nickname that I have there with the number one Sabres fan in Alberta, like with most nicknames, I didn't come up with that myself, and it was like just a lot of friends and family started calling me that over the years because like I'm not really proud of this record because for a lot of years like both these teams like really sucked. But since 2006, I've made every Sabres game in Edmonton.
Oh, nice.
So
Well, you know what? Be proud of your team, man. Like I watched the Oilers through the decade of darkness and supported them the whole way. I don't believe in abandoning your team, and uh,
yeah,
I think our reward at the end, getting McDavid ultimately was worth it. And I would go through another rebuild all over again like that to get a player of his ilk. So
yeah.
it was a lot of tough years of watching the Oilers just get pumped night after night. But I mean, to see where the team is now, like I said, all worth it. Although I mean, I would prefer not to go through another 10-year rebuild. And like you said, your team, uh, sort of in a similar position. Like the Oilers were tied with the Florida Panthers for the longest playoff drought in NHL history for a while. The Sabres then, of course, broke that record. But no, I mean, look, have you ever met a Sabres fan in Alberta that was bigger than you? So I mean, you might actually hold the claim to that title.
It's funny because I've met like a bunch over the years just from going to the games and stuff. And just a little
Okay.
promotional plug on the side is there's a Twitter account out there called Displaced Sabres. And what they do is every road game, they actually gather fans and they take a group picture for as many Sabres fans you can find. And for the last 6 years now, I've kind of been their Edmonton correspondent, and it's kind of
Okay.
cool just to see over the years, just the amount of fans just we've grown over the last 6 years of just Sabre visits, and literally just through Rogers Place. If I just see a Sabres fan, like, hey, meet here at this time, and we're just taking a group picture, so it's great to see kind of everybody just grow over the years, and
Yeah.
the only reason why I say I'm the quote unquote number one is because I've caught the Sabres close to 20 times in my life, and it's only ever been in Edmonton and Calgary. I've made the trip to Calgary about 4 or 5 times, but I've only ever caught the Sabres in Alberta. So, but I've watched them live nearly 20 times, but not outside of this province.
So when they do eventually make the playoffs, is a trip to Buffalo in the plans for you to actually get to see your favorite team in their home building?
I would like to, yeah, and I would say that is part of the plan. Whether I can kind of find the time off work and make it all happen is a
I'm sure
different
it would be
story.
tough. I mean, and plus,
I know, but
playoff tickets as it is, and then you're flying across the continent. But I'm sure for someone like you who's cheered for the team for a quarter of a century to have that opportunity to see your favorite team in their own barn, that would probably just be like a once in a lifetime opportunity.
yeah, no, I would love to. And honestly, I try to keep things realistic. Like I said at the start of this season, I said like on a good year they'll have around 90 points. And never once that I think they're going to make it this year, but I feel like they've already overachieved, and playoffs would have always been a bonus this year. Because I feel like coming into this year with the youngest team in the league, you got to have your expectations kind of within, a realistic bar, right? So I didn't expect playoffs at all. And even still to this date, even after the win tonight, they're 5 points out with 2 games in hand, but I still don't think they're going to make it. But next year I do feel like they're going to make it. And if it does come, I'm going to try to get out there. I just, my company's pretty nice sometimes. If I give it enough notice,
Okay.
maybe I can get the time off. But you know how it is with playoffs, it's hard to kind of pinpoint dates.
Yep.
But that would be like in a historic game because first playoff game in over a decade, and yeah, trust me, I would love to make it out there. It's just if I can make it all work is a
I
different
can
story.
imagine the I mean, I still have to drive 5 hours to come see the Oilers anytime I want. But the good thing is I don't have to, book a plane flight or anything. It's not like I have the luxury of living in an NHL city where I just have to like drive to the game that night. There is, booking a hotel room. Like I said, the gas money to drive out there and everything. So it does become a little more expensive to see my team live. But even next level for you to, like I said, literally go across North America to get to their home building.
A little bit, yeah. And like I mentioned, I got family out there, and I got a few of my family members like, oh,
So
you can
that
cross
helps. You have
America.
people you can stay with.
Yeah,
So,
exactly. So at least
yeah.
hotels off. I can cross the hotel off. I don't have to worry about a hotel. But I've mapped it out, and I'm either gonna fly Edmonton to Hamilton or else Edmonton to Toronto, and then kind of drive the rest of the way. But no
Okay.
matter what, it's not going to be cheap. But I feel like just with the circumstances and breaking that playoff drought when they eventually do it next year, it'll be a historic moment. And I feel like I would have to be there. Just the feeling in the arena and
Yeah.
everything like that, and just the city will probably be buzzing, right? So it's something where I would have to do everything I can to make it there.
And I mean, who knows? They could still climb in this year. Like you said, they're 5 points back of the Islanders with 2 games in hand. So you win those 2 games, it's a little tighter. As of
And
right now, the Sabres with the win tonight, they're on pace for 88 points. So your prediction ahead of the season of 90 isn't too far off.
yeah, and they play the Islanders one more time as well too. So I feel like they it's there. Like the opportunity, they control their own fate, whatever cliche line you want to use. But
Hmm.
the chances will be there. But I just feel like they're gonna have a tough schedule, and I just feel like their inexperience in their youth just might be too much to kind of overcome the rest of the way.
But you feel
And
like it
trust me,
was a
I
big
hope
step
I am
forward
wrong.
this year. Yeah. But like you said, they've taken a step forward in the right direction this year, though.
Yeah, and that's the main thing because last year they finished with 75 points, and I just feel like you got to have realistic expectations. And like this year they had what was it, two rookie forwards in the top six with Jack Quinn and JJ Paterka, and then Owen Power was his full rookie year, and he's in the top four.
Yeah.
And then Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen ended up coming in and being the starter as well as a rookie. So I just feel like you have so much youth, so much
Almost too
inexperience
much youth
around
at the
there.
same time. Yeah. but they'll have another year of experience under them, and maybe the Sabres will look to bring in a few veterans this offseason. We'll see. Um, so I can assume that you're going to pick something from 1999, but I'll ask it anyway. What is your favorite memory of watching the Sabres?
See, I'm not going to go 99 because
Oh,
I hate to bring this up, but I'm kind of like too young, I guess, to go that route.
okay.
But I would love to go 2006 again because I remember 2006 really well because just I don't know, my favorite about that I just remember watching with a group of friends is in round two when they eliminated Ottawa. My just favorite moment, I just remember just being so excited. Jason Pominville scored a shorthanded overtime goal to eliminate the Senators. And I know it's just whatever. It's a round two series clinching goal in overtime, but just the way it happened though, just shorthanded, just skating around Daniel Alfredson and kind of getting the puck in there in overtime for Pominville. But just a huge memory. I just remember just jumping out of my chair and just screaming that like Pominville scores shorthanded in overtime.
Yeah.
And so the 2006 round two to eliminate Ottawa, I would say.
That's an interesting one. I didn't see that coming, but I mean, obviously that was a big playoff run for them too. I think the 1999 one stands out to me more because the Oilers weren't still in the playoffs at that time, so I can still picture that Sabres run a little more because they made it to the final.
Yeah.
I mean the '06 one, like I said, I thought the Oilers and Sabres were going to meet for the cup, but
Yep.
came up a little bit short. But still, what a run reaching the conference final for them. And you and I were roughly the same age at the time, so uh, pretty cool to get to enjoy something like that as a teenager and just see your team go on this run that even though both of our teams came up a little short, still a ton of memories all these years later. You brought up that one about the clinching game against Detroit for Edmonton. That's one of my favorite Oilers games ever. The goal that Hemsky scored with just over a minute to go. You were in the building that night. I mean, that must have just like almost tore the roof off the place when he put the puck in the net.
Yeah, and I do remember that very well just because I was a little too young. I never really got to experience any Gretzky days or any Stanley Cup days.
Right.
So in 2006, that was still Rexall Place kind of thing, right? So a little smaller, but that place was just
I love that
pounding.
building though.
Yeah.
I
Oh,
I
so many
was
memories
lucky.
there, and just the size of the building just really helped for the atmosphere, though.
Yeah.
Everything was just always just so loud and electric in there, and yeah, I just remember I hate to say it, but just loudest building I personally think I've ever been in for like a sporting event. And I know it was only round one, but just thinking back then, Detroit was I know they were first seed, but I can't remember if they're even the President's Trophy winner at the time too. But it was
Detroit was the
first,
President's Trophy winner in '06. Yeah.
yeah. So it was
And
first
then I think
versus
the
eight.
Sabres won it in '07 the next year.
Yeah, exactly. But I just remember just the atmosphere was just incredible in Rexall Place because you had the first place Detroit Red Wings, and then the little eighth place Oilers that just barely made it in there, but they made some great deadline moves. And
Yeah.
I just remember just the party was just incredible, and just leading out like outside of Rexall, just all the honking horns and all the people screaming and the "Let's Go Oilers" chants. Like, I was thinking, oh man, maybe I should become an Oilers fan, right? But
Well, you
it
said
was
it
just
was the time when you had to make a decision, and I mean, 29-point difference between the Red Wings and Oilers that year. No one gave them a chance, but the two things they had going for them above anything else, above Hemsky having a career year, Ryan Smith still being in his prime, Fernando Pisani having the playoff run of his life. The two most important things were that they had the hottest goalie in the league at the time in Dwayne Rollison, and Chris Pronger was, if not the best, second best defenseman in the NHL. So those two things were just huge factors in the reasons why Edmonton was able to go to the final.
yeah, just Kevin Lowe did a great job at the
He
deadline that
did.
year.
That was a masterclass, especially after so many years of the Oilers having to trade away their best players because they couldn't afford them pre-lockout, but also pre-salary cap. And now he had the financial ability to make these deals, and just being on more of an even playing field and getting to bring in guys like Spacek and Samsonov. Just you saw, well, and of course Rolson being the most important. Like these were the moves that set them up to go on that run.
Yeah, no, 100%. They loaded up just a great way with just depth, like you said, with spot check there, and Samsonov was another great pickup, and they just balanced their roster out well. Like, they had the forward group, they had the defense, their depth. Like, it seemed like they had no holes, So they even though they were an 8th seeded team,
they weren't a superstar laden team. Like, you look at the Red Wings, there was a lot more skill and talent over there, but the Oilers worked hard for everything, and like you said, they were a team that could roll 4 lines and had depth. They might not have had the 100-point scorers that the Red Wings had in the past, but I always felt Hemsky was going to get there if he would have stayed healthy too. But just, to see the Oilers overcome all the odds and win that series, just one of my favorite hockey memories ever.
Yeah, no, I agree with you all the way. And I still have bugged somewhat with their friends because they always say, if Rolison wasn't injured, that cup would have been ours. And it's, hey,
I believe that too. I
always come back with some Buffalo stuff though too, because they were missing 4 out of their top 6 D man, and they're missing their second line center. And I'm like, well, wait, if Buffalo was fully healthy, I think we would have stood a great chance against the Oilers, even with Rolison. But maybe my Buffalo bias is coming out a little bit. But they're missing a lot of chunk of their starters that year too in the playoff run.
Yeah, and I mean, I would have been fine with that because it would have knocked the Hurricanes out too. So to see our teams get to go up against each other at full health, I mean, that would have been awesome too. So just to sort of wrap up here on this, you said that you haven't missed an Oiler or a Sabres game in Edmonton for the past, was it 6? You said?
Since 2006.
Oh, okay. Sorry, since 2006. Sorry.
So it's been like nearly 20 years now. Yeah, and I will admit, a lot of times, like I was lucky. I had friends that were season ticket holders, and when you're like in 2012 or 2013, nobody really wants the Sabres and Oilers matchup. You know what I mean?
No, so it's an easier ticket to get for you.
Yeah, and a lot of times, a few times, I had just people just give it to me. They're like, you know what? They're like, I'm not going to be able to sell these. Like, you'd actually get enjoyment. You'd actually enjoy this kind of matchup. So here you go, buddy. So I will admit, I was fortunate. I had a 4 different friends with season tickets that just kind of helped me over the years, and I'm going to keep my streak going for as long as I can now. Because, like I said, it's been since 2006, and I don't plan on missing a game anytime soon. So anytime the Sabres are in Edmonton, it's kind of like a holiday for me in a way.
Yeah. Well, I mean, our teams played each other last week, and the Oilers were able to sneak out a 3-2 win with, McDavid getting a couple goals and passing Gretzky for the second most game-winning goals in Oilers history with 62. But earlier this season, it was the Sabres that got the better of the Oilers, and it was actually the 3rd game of the regular season. And it happened to be, interestingly enough, Edmonton-born Eric Comrie in goal for the Sabres, and had perhaps his best game in the NHL, stopping 46 out of 48 shots he faced to lead the Sabres to a 4-2 win. I don't know if that one ranks anywhere special for you among the best games that you've ever seen, but I'm sure that just seeing the Edmonton kid come home and beat the local team must have been pretty satisfying for yourself.
Yeah, no, that was a good matchup. As you mentioned, it was the 3rd game of the year, and it was cool just to get it out of the way, I guess. And it was the Sabres' first road game of the year as well. And I don't know if this is the first time in history, but it was actually what's it called? Eric Comrie versus Stuart Skinner. So we had Edmonton versus Edmonton in the crease as well.
I remember hearing about this too, and a bunch of people were looking up I think it was the most recent time that it happened, with 2 Edmonton-born goalies playing for 2 teams in Edmonton. It was done, I think, the last time in 86 or 87, when it was Grant Fuhr and Clint Malarchuk who was in goal for the Quebec Nordiques at the time.
Okay.
So it had definitely been the first time in like 35 years. But yeah, cool to see. And then it happened again later this season when it was Carter Hart versus Stuart Skinner in Edmonton.
That is right. Yeah. So twice in the same year. That's actually pretty cool.
With 2 Edmonton goaltenders on either team. Okay, Jeff, I want to now dive into the current state of the Sabres, and I think we should start by talking about Tage Thompson here, who's obviously having a season for the ages for him. Just exceeded all expectations so far. So when the Sabres acquired Thompson in the Ryan O'Reilly trade with the St. Louis Blues in the summer of 2018, I don't know if you had any grand expectations for him at the time, and then he only scored 15 goals in his first 3 years with the team before breaking out with 38 goals last year. And this year, he's continued his remarkable rise with a career high 42 goals in just 66 games. Jeff, when did you start to believe that Thompson had superstar potential?
Yeah, when the trade first went down, it was they got four players in return. There was Vladimir Sobotka, Patrick Berglund, Tage Thompson, and then a first round pick, which turned into defenseman Ryan Johnson. So the way I looked at it is you're trading away Ryan O'Reilly for two players for the now, which are pretty much just stopgaps, but then two players for the future, and Tage Thompson and Ryan Johnson. And with Tage Thompson, I'll admit, like when we first got him, all they kept preaching is patience. This guy's for the future. He's a former late first round pick. Like let's give him some time. Let's be patient. And a few years went by, and things just didn't really seem to spark or anything. Just wasn't really happening there. As you mentioned, like the 14, 15 goals or whatever it was,
Spread over
wasn't off too
3 years,
great a
yeah.
start. But I think what the turning point was, and say, I hate to drop his name because a lot of Oiler fans kind of have good memories of him. But when the Sabres had Ralph Kruger coaching the team there, and it sucks too because I know I'm going a little off topic here, but when Kruger was coaching at Edmonton, I was kind of a supporter of his. I was like, this guy seems like he's got a good hold of the room. The players love him. Guys like Taylor Hall kept saying like, "Oh, Ralph's a great coach. Like we love Ralph." So when the Sabres hired Ralph Kruger, I was like, yeah, like he was good as an assistant at Edmonton. He was good as a head for that half year he did, and
Yeah.
let's see what Kruger has. But I'm not gonna lie, Kruger kind of just I don't know how to say it politely, but Kruger kind of shit the bed there in Buffalo, and just a lot of the decisions he was making, I try to give him the benefit of the doubt because I'm like, what, he's the NHL coach. I'm just some fan here, and I
He
don't got
knows
the
best,
resume he
right?
does.
Yeah.
But just so many decisions. I was like, Kruger, what's going on here, buddy? Like, what are you doing here, Ralph? Right. So I feel like ever since they kind of made the coaching change and they fired Ralph Kruger and they brought in coach Don Granato, that's just been a huge spark for a lot of players, not only Tage, but Tage was playing the wing. And when Don Granato came in, Don moved into center. And, I think that's around the time where Tage just started turning things around. I don't know if just moving him to center just opened up the ice or he just saw things a little differently there. But ever since the coaching change, when they brought in Don Granato, that just seems to be the turning point for Tage Thompson. Granato and Thompson had a past as well. And I just think that just a brand new coach, a brand new voice, maybe the new system as well, because Kruger had a very just boring and questionable system that sometimes you don't understand what they're doing. Like you got these high flying players like Rasmus Dahlin and you're trying to tone them down a bit, right? So Kruger had a boring just style that I didn't understand at times. So it's great to see Tage coming breaking out the way he has. And I'll admit I never saw it coming. I kept saying like, what, this guy's for the future. Maybe he'll get like 60 points, 75 points in a good year, but he's exceeding that already and he's just continuing to grow. And they signed him to that extension last summer as well.
Right.
For 7.14 million. That doesn't even kick in until next year. And I feel like that's looking like a pretty good steal of a deal already.
Oh, without a doubt. And I was going to ask you, it's looking like a steal of a deal now, but going back to last August when he signed that deal, he was coming off a 68 point season. Now, 38 goals, however, but still, after just having one strong season in the league, were you concerned at all at the time about investing that much money into a player who didn't have like a proven track record?
Yeah, no, 100%. I'll say I was concerned because I remember kind of just thinking it was a little premature of them and just kind of, like you said, it was just kind of just one season, and it was something where, like, I will admit, I was thinking, okay, let's see what he can do. Let's see if he can do it again, right? And this is where I'm glad I wasn't the GM because if I was playing the GM role and I would have said, okay, Tage, let's see what you got. Who knows what his contract would have been like if they didn't sign him when they did, right? Like if they signed him like in the middle of the season or if they waited to this coming off season to finally extend him, they would have been paying a lot more. So I definitely thought like, whoa, guys, like maybe this is a little premature. Like, let's see if he can replay this in his second year. Let's see if he can duplicate that kind of production. And well, he has, and he's even going further than what he did last year. So GM Kevin Adams made a great gamble by signing him the way he did. And it's one of those situations where I'm glad I was wrong. I guess I was thinking, I was like, what are you guys doing? It's a little soon for that, or let's see what he can do in the second year. But it's it's definitely paying off.
Yeah. And I mean, when you watch Tage Thompson, to see a player who's 6'6" and have the hands that he does, like even in the game against Edmonton, third game of the season, he scored a beautiful goal, which I wasn't very happy about as an Oilers fan. But to take the puck from, I think he picked it up somewhere around the red line, skated all the way in, made a nice move, and just used his long reach to outweight the defender and the goaltender and tuck it in on the backhand. It's probably going to be his highlight reel goal of the year, or one of them. I haven't watched every goal, or I don't follow the Sabres as closely as you do, so you're going to have a better memory of some of the big goals he scored, but that's got to be one of the best ones. And I think that's when he sort of put people on notice that the 38 goal performance he had last year wasn't a fluke, and he was going to come back out with another strong season this year.
Yeah, no, I do recall the goal you're talking about. He's had another one. I think it was against Tampa Bay this year, but he's had a few of those where you can kind of say they're really just wow, like highlight reel candidate type of goals. And like you said, how does a guy his size do that type of thing? And just spark it out of nowhere, right? So, and this is leading down another topic, but it feels like he's found chemistry with Jeff Skinner and Alex Tuch. And it's just you can't split them up now. You know what I mean? And those three together have all got career high in points now. Like Jeff Skinner just recently, he's been in the league for like 10 years now, and Jeff Skinner finally just hit a career high in points this year, playing with Tage Thompson there. So it's great to see the chemistry they have. And as much as Skinner, I'll be the first one to admit he is definitely overpaid at the $9 million. But, every team's got a few players you can say they're overpaid at this point, right? So, but Skinner's definitely playing the way he should be this year. And I feel like Skinner and Thompson and even Alex Tuch, that's their top line. Pretty much been their top line all of last year, all of this year. And they're all locked down now, and hopefully they can continue to build that chemistry for the future too.
For sure, and that looked like a contract that could hamper them in the future when he signed that 8 million, or that 9 year, or sorry, 8 year, $9 million per extension. And I think the thing that was concerning people is, he did score a career high 40 goals, so he was going to get big money somewhere. Buffalo wanted to keep him. But then he followed up the next two seasons with 14 goals and 7 goals, respectively. I'm sure after he had 7 goals in 2020-21 at $9 million, you were more than concerned, I would say, about how that contract was going to age. But then he bounced back with a 33 goal season last year, and now has 29 goals in 63 games. What do you attribute his rejuvenation to, and getting back to the level that he was at earlier in his career when he was a multi-time 30-goal scorer?
See, I hate to bring his name up again, but I have to say Ralph Krueger. Ralph Krueger again.
Stifled the offense.
A little bit, only because when Skinner got that 40-goal season, it was with Phil Housley and Jack Eichel and things like that, and kind of playing top line minutes. Always get the opportunity with Jack Eichel and playing on the top line. And then when Ralph Krueger gets in there, the only thing I can think of is he just wants to spread the talent out. But Ralph Krueger refused to put Jeff Skinner and Jack Eichel together. Just after they finished getting 40 goals and everything like that, Ralph Krueger wanted to split them up. Which, once again, the only thing I can think of is maybe you just want to spread out your talent, I guess, sure. But just the Ralph Krueger, Jeff Skinner, it was just bad. I don't know how else to describe it, but it was, I don't know if you recall it, but there were some times where Jeff Skinner got sent down to the fourth line, and Jeff Skinner was even healthy scratched a few times under Ralph Krueger. Now, I don't know if you blame that on the coach or blame it on the player, but it's going to be one of those cliche things where it's a little bit of both. But I feel like Skinner wasn't really getting the opportunity. Like, if you're a $9 million player getting 40 goals, I don't know why you're putting him on the fourth line or, healthy scratch, or he was on the taxi squad a little bit during the COVID era. So I feel like just Ralph Krueger and just the way he was deploying Jeff Skinner, it just was never working out. Like it's,
and then
a lot of
it's
on the
have
player
to make
too.
a switch, right? If the coach isn't clicking with the group, I mean, some players can overcome it. If you're one of the true superstars in the league, I think it doesn't matter who you have behind the bench. You'll figure out a way to do it. But if a coach really wants to implement a different style than is set up for the players that he has in his lineup, you're going to see players underachieving. Like I think with John Tortorella when he came to Vancouver and tried to turn everyone into checkers, and it didn't mesh well with the Sedins and everyone, and that's why he only lasted 1 year there, right? And I did like Ralph when he was in Edmonton. I thought that he was a forward-thinking coach and was a good player or a good coach for that group at the time. I don't, looking back now, I try not to get frustrated about anything that happened before the McDavid draft because
Mhm.
everything's water under the bridge because every decision they made before McDavid, good or bad, led to them getting McDavid. So I've let all of that go now. But I can see what you're saying where maybe the resume looked good for Kruger, coming from even working with an English soccer club and just, being such a, like I said, forward thinking kind of innovative coach. But it just it sounds like from what you've described, the players that he was trying to build up, and these are young guys at the time, like Dahlin and Skinner was a bit older, but Thompson and these guys, it wasn't the right fit for them.
Yeah, no, that's a good way to put it. And like, you can see three players, for example, in Thompson, Skinner, and Dahlin. Ever since Kruger's left, they've all just exploded in three different ways. And Dahlin's another example where when Kruger was around, he was trying to get Rasmus to play more just of a defensive style, which I understand he is a defenseman and everything. But as we've watched from Dahlin this year,
Well,
last year,
you
he's
saw the highlight reel goals when he was still in Sweden, and I mean
yeah.
that's what made you excited about this prospect is when you would see him and um, every year there's the number one prospect and the in 2017-18 leading up to that draft you would just see this like big strong defenseman who could skate and take the puck and make these beautiful plays. I think that as a Sabres fan, you were excited to get that guy, and then maybe some of that creativity kind of disappeared for a while under Kruger.
Yeah, no, definitely a little bit. And some people like to compare like Darlene to like a Makar or somebody. And, it's tough to compare because I feel like when Rasmus Dahlin came into the team,
Yeah.
he came into a pretty lackluster support staff. And besides Jack Eichel, they didn't really have much happening,
No, I
for their
didn't have the
roster.
supporting cast that Makar has in Colorado.
Yeah, that's the way I'm looking at it. Yeah. So Darlene had a first few years of growing pains, I feel like, and the Sabres didn't really have a good installation support staff around him. So it
No.
took some time, but I feel like the last few years as Darlene's been growing and maturing a little more, and they've also been building around him better. I feel like he's finally coming into his own. So it's great to see the type of player Darlene has been this year, and I feel like he's only 22 years old, and how much is it going to increase in the future, right? So he's going to just continue to grow from here.
Yeah, I mean that sort of leads me what I wanted to talk to you about next is uh looking at this team. The Sabres are set up well for the future, and I think a big reason for that is your two former first overall picks on the blue line in Rasmus Dahlin and Owen Power. Just how much more optimistic are you about Buffalo's chances going forward because they have those two foundational pieces on defense?
Yeah, no, I'm very optimistic, honestly, and I'll admit there's another situation where I like to admit where I was wrong, and I have no problem admitting when I'm wrong. But during the Owen Power draft, I was actually hoping that they were going to draft Matty Beniers from
Oh,
Seattle
okay.
there, just because I feel like they already had Darlene, and at the time and place, I wasn't kind of sure what kind of centers Tage Thompson and even Dylan Cousins were going to be, right? So I wanted to kind of then solidify that center and kind of get Matty if we could out of Michigan. But they once again made a great pick by getting Owen Power, and it's just once again Adams looks like he knows what he's doing with his drafting team and his scouting staff. And I'm a firm believer in defense. You're not going to really win championships or go far without a defense. And sorry to pick on your Oilers, but I feel like that's what the Oilers have been lacking the last
Oh,
few years.
I mean,
Is
it was a problem for many years. I look at okay when Jonathan Taves and Patrick Kane were picked first and third overall in 2006 and 2007. They joined a team that had Duncan Keith and Brent Seabrook already,
yes.
and that set the Blackhawks up for early success. And of course, they won 3 Stanley Cups, and they won one very early in Patrick Kane and Jonathan Taves' careers. For McDavid coming in, like they had Hall, they had Everly, they had Nugent Hopkins, they even had still Yakupov at the time. He wasn't in the same class as those guys, but still a first overall pick. Anyway, so there were there was young talent there that McDavid was joining the fold with. But on the blue line, they didn't have that Keith and Seabrook who were already in place. And it took years to like build that up and, get Clefbaum to the level that he was at before all his injuries. And then now, bringing in a guy like Ekholm to insulate the blue line. But I look at some of those teams in the past and think, man, that would have been awesome if the Oilers could have had something like that for McDavid when he arrived in the NHL. And for your Sabres, now that there's this young group of players and they have a 22-year-old and 20-year-old defenseman on the left side who are considered to be, future all-star level defensemen or better, I think that that's got to be a pretty exciting thing for you.
Yeah, no, it's extremely exciting, and like I feel like defense is sometimes underrated or underappreciated, and having those two type of cornerstones are just the type of building blocks you need. Like the Oilers, for example, you guys got your Connor and Leon, and you're building from the center group or the forwards if you want. And Buffalo, they're going to take a different approach, and they're going to build from the blue line. And I feel like it's still going to work out because I don't mean to kind of toot his own horn too much, but I feel like GM Kevin Adams has done a great job just signing his youngsters long term and just kind of locking everybody down, because Dahlin isn't locked down yet, but Matthias Samuelsson, who I want to bring up Matthias Samuelsson a bit because he's a straight up big giant defensive defenseman, but I feel like that sometimes gets overlooked because he doesn't put up the flashy plays or doesn't put up the points. But for a good like 90% of the season, the top pair has been Samuelsson and Dahlin, and I feel like they complement each other amazingly because Dahlin's all offense and all just high flying power. But then Samuelson's a stay-at-home type and kind of helps balance Dahlin and keep things balanced on that pair there. And
Yeah.
then Owen Power as well. Like you said, he's only 20 years old and he's been playing top 4 minutes all year. And it's very rare to see a top four defenseman at 20 years old kind of do that type of thing. So they're hopefully going to be kind of like our Niedermeyer Pronger types for the future. And the way the forwards are all kind of falling into place, I feel like they got a good, well-balanced group for the future. The two things I feel like they got to worry about is their defensive depth, because after Dahlin, Power, and Samuelsson, I feel like it's kind of a big drop after that. And then their goaltending, they got Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen right now as a rookie, but what his ceiling looks like, or what he looks like as a full-fledged starter next year or the beyond.
Right.
You never know. You never know with goalies, of course.
So just to wrap up on the Sabres now, you said that, because of the tough schedule ahead and the lack of experience on this team, you don't think that they're going to sneak in this year, but you're calling it next year for a playoff spot.
Yeah, and I hate to call things like that, but it is. I feel like, they overachieved this year and they're on the right path, and I feel like for them to get close and fall short, I feel like it could almost be a good thing because a young group like that, they're going to be hungry because they're going to say, hey, look what we did this year when nobody thought we could do, kind of thing, right? So I feel like this young group is just going to be extremely hungry. And Adams, I feel like with the cap space they have, because they have a tremendous amount of cap space coming into this offseason, hopefully they can add some more pieces to the blue line or even just add some more forward depth. And you look at the East and the way things are looking in the Atlantic. We got teams like Tampa and Toronto. I feel like their days are kind of numbered in a way. Like they're doing good right now, but their window is closing. So I feel like
Well,
with
see,
teams
that's
like
what I wanted to
Tampa,
ask you next, is that there
sorry.
there are so many elite teams in your division. Like obviously the Boston Bruins are having a historically good year. Uh, Toronto, it's hard to know what's going to happen in the future there. Like they do have Matthews' contract coming up in a year, if he'll stay there or not. But I mean, there is still a very strong core. Although they do have some older players like Tavares, and um, they have some expensive guys too, like Marner and Nylander. So it's hard to say how that's all going to work out in the future. But as of right now, I still don't see them dropping off anytime soon. And as for the Tampa Bay Lightning, I mean, 3 straight trips to the Stanley Cup final. They won the first 2 times they made it there. Um, by by any means an elite team, even if they have taken a little step back. I think come playoff time, that could be a team that's still ready to roll and has that experience of going to the dance so many times. So when you look at those teams ahead of you, um, I don't know if you're predicting a playoff series win next year, but just sneaking in, it's going to be tough even to those 3 spots. So are you thinking like a wild card spot if the Sabres get in?
Yeah, and like we're looking ahead to next season, right?
Yeah.
And I think for next year, it'll be a wild card position because as we're talking, the Atlantic is still pretty strong. Teams like Boston, Toronto, and Tampa, they are aging and their window's closing, but
But
I
they're
don't
not
think
going to
it's
fall apart
yeah,
next year, right?
yeah, like it's not closing or not falling apart that soon. You know what I mean? So I agree with you. I feel like it's a little too soon for next year. And if and when Buffalo does sneak in, I think it will be a wild card spot. You have teams like Pittsburgh who are just barely hanging on by a thread, it seems like. And I think Pittsburgh's another one where, as much as they're in the Metro, well, we'll be seeing them in battling for a wild card spot.
Yeah.
And I think next year, because Pittsburgh they got some Asian players as well. Tristan Jarry's an upcoming free agent. I don't know if he's going to leave or not, but they got to figure out what to do with their whole organization. So I feel like Pittsburgh's a team where their window's closing on them, and they could probably fall out of a
Well,
wild card spot next year. So
I mean, they still have Crosby and Malkin, but they're getting into their mid to late 30s now, and I mean, who knows? If they get into the playoffs, they could always go on a run. But it just seems like for that core, they've taken it as far as they've gone. They've played a lot of playoff hockey over the years, and I don't know if I see another deep run for Crosby in his career. Anything could happen, right? But just like right now, like you said, they're just barely holding on to a playoff position. So who knows if they'll even get in next year. But
yeah,
that there should be an opportunity for the Sabres. Like just looking at the standings, I'm not super confident in the Islanders at all. Florida took a huge step back this year, and aside from that, Washington's on the decline. Ottawa's coming up. Do you almost feel like out of all the teams that are sort of either in the mix or on the rise, that Ottawa might be one that's going to be contending with the Sabres a little bit here?
yeah. Looking at those, Ottawa would be the one I would worry about. They got the young team, and they got a mixture with some older players like Giroux as well, Claude Giroux. And as much as a lot of other fans were giving their thoughts on Jacob Chikrin, I feel like it was still a great addition for Ottawa. They needed him. Their blue line, their defense were kind of not up to par with the rest of their group. So I feel like adding Chikrin does help.
For sure. And I just before we call it a night, I want to get some Oilers opinions from you as well. I won't say like fan opinions, but just thoughts on the team as an outsider, but technically still an insider living in the city of Edmonton. So just looking at where they're at this year, they're currently in a wild card spot, but the Pacific is so tight that they could still claw their way into a top 3 spot. And really, there isn't one team that scares me in the Pacific for the Oilers. I think they could beat Vegas. I think they could beat LA. I'm even more confident they could beat Seattle. So coming out of the Pacific, it doesn't seem like that big of a stretch, especially when McDavid and Draisaitl hit playoff mode. The season that McDavid's had overall, I mean, pushing for 150 points here and potentially 70 goals. He's going to win probably 4 different individual awards this year. Draisaitl, another potential 50 goal, 100-point season, and just all the other guys who are having career years, Hyman, Nuge. Just give me some general thoughts on what you've seen from the Oilers this year.
Yeah, no, I love picking on the Oilers because just as just they're very
Well, you
very
got to bug
passionate.
your dad and brother, right?
Well, that's for sure. Yeah, that's what I've been doing since I was a kid and all that. But like
Yeah.
usually the Oilers are usually been a better team. But like I don't know. I love picking on just a lot of my friends and family too. Like I play hockey as well, and just like, everybody in the dressing room are Oilers fans, right? So I try to be fair
The
with them.
antagonist.
But sorry.
The antagonist kind of giving them the
In some
gears all the
ways,
time.
yes, but also like sometimes I feel like I have to stop that in ways because sometimes people take me too seriously. So
Okay.
if I gotta speak honestly with it, I've
Yeah.
always said for the past few years, like I'm not a big Ken Holland fan.
Hmm.
Now my main reason is just I feel like he's just a little on the overrated side, and a lot of the praise he gets, I feel like they're just I don't know. He's not the savior. I feel like he's just kind of piggybacking off other people in some ways, like Connor and Leon hitting other levels. And the main two big just acquisitions that I have issues with, I guess, is I never liked the Philip Broberg draft, and I always just thought he's not a top 10 pick. And when you're drafting the top 10, you got to take advantage of those picks. That's their last top 10 pick they're going to have for probably a long while. And as much as I'll admit, I can see that Broberg, he's having a good year.
He's
But I feel like,
emerging now. Like it took a few years, and defensemen do take longer. And of
yes,
course, that was his first draft pick with the organization, so he's going to be, judged on that one way or the other early on. But would Trevor Zegras have been an option? Would Cole Caulfield have been an option? I think so. But now when you look at if he does reach his potential and he's still only 21, that could be an important piece for the Oilers on the blue line down the road.
yeah, and I agree 100%. And and I hate to bring the McDavid card up, but when you're in year 8 with McDavid, I feel like sometimes you'd expect things to be a little more sped up, And I'll give Holland a little bit of leeway because I feel like he did walk into some, every GM will walk into a mess, and Holland walked into a mess, and it's going to take some time for the previous GM's mess to kind of get out of the way, kind of thing, right?
It will. And the
So,
Oilers did finish second in their division for 3 straight years before this one. So the Oilers have consistently been pushing for a division title. They're a little bit lower in the standings this year, and maybe part of that's attributed to the injuries that they've had. Like they've had some key pieces out for big chunks of the season. Most namely Evander Kane, who's missed over half the season right now. But to your point, like I see what you're saying. Like you would like to see the Oilers as like a top 3, top 5 team at the league by this stage. I can see your point there.
yeah, and I keep going on about Holland. There's only one other thing I wanted to pick on is I was never a fan of the Jack Campbell signing, just because I feel like he's mostly been a career backup, and he's only had one season where he had like a starting goalie type of load, right? So I feel like I don't know, I don't like that signing only because you're kind of you had Stuart Skinner right there, and as much as people think he was unproven, I'll agree he was unproven, but to bring in Campbell for 5 years, I feel like really kind of screws things up with Skinner and screws things up just for how do you spread out the rest of your cap space, right?
I think for me, the Oilers couldn't bank on Skinner being ready with just 14 games of NHL experience coming into this year, and they had to try and solidify the goaltending position. If Skinner steals the job, then fine. I think a lot of Oilers fans expected that he would eventually, but probably not this soon. Skinner or Campbell, sorry, did have that one really strong stretch in January, but other than that, it's been a pretty down year for him, and let's hope that he can bounce back with a stronger second year in Edmonton. But as of right now, yeah, there's not been a lot to write home about for Jack Campbell. I still think that he could rebound, but like I said, he needs to take his game up to a big step next year, multiple steps even, because as of right now, Skinner is the number one goalie, and I think the fact that between the two of them, they're only going to make 7.6 million next year. Like that's reasonable for two goalies, especially if they can trade off and be a tandem. Although it does seem like Skinner is probably going to play more often than Skinner will. So anyway, that's just my thoughts on the goaltending position. But I see what you're saying about Campbell. I think the Oilers were also in kind of a tough spot because it wasn't that deep of a goaltending free agent class. Their options were basically Darcy Kemper and Jack Campbell, and with Washington swooping up Kemper, it kind of forced the Oilers' hand and said, well, if we're going to get a goalie, this is going to be the guy.
See, this is where I think we might get into a little bit of a debate. Sorry, but
No, it's okay.
I feel like they had other options. I feel like just they had other options besides Kemper, just because I forget offhand, but there was a good 4 or 5 maybe RFA goalies that switched teams, like Vitek Vanasek or Alex Georgiev, or I forget the others off, or
they could have traded for Husso, who went to Detroit. That was the other one that I was really considering last summer, and I thought could be an option for them.
I just feel like there was a lot more options than just Kemper. Like there was an RFA, or there was even Aiden Hill. Aiden Hill got traded out of San Jose. But like I wasn't ready to make Skinner the starter right away. I just felt like you guys needed somebody who didn't have the 5-year term, like 1 to 2 year term, because just the 1 to 2 years is probably what Skinner would have needed, right?
Yeah.
So as much as
if
I was
the
gonna say,
salary
sorry. As much
cap
as
sorry, no, you go ahead.
I was gonna say, you do have a point that the 7.5 million that they'll be combined next year. It's not bad, of course. Relatively looking around the league, that's a pretty good um, it's a pretty good price to have tied up into your top two goalies. But I just keep wondering, like, if they had somebody at half the price as Campbell, that's another 2.5 million you have to get another defenseman or get another
I
right
hear that.
winger.
And let's hope that the salary cap does go up 3 million this summer. I remember in the fall it was being mentioned. I think it was Elliot Friedman who put out a report that the cap could jump as much as 3 or 4 million in the summer of 2023. So that would be a huge asset for not only the Oilers but for every team around the league to have that extra spending space. I'm sure your Sabres would be able to use that room too. But yeah, Campbell needs to play better, like plain and simple. He has to be better, and if he's going to make it a tandem with Skinner or try to reclaim the starter's position, then we have to see him come into camp next year ready to go and being able to not have a leaky goal every game. And the things that he's gone through this year, like, the uh, feeling so down on himself after every bad goal he allows, and it just kind of mentally shaking him and just changing equipment. I think seeing maybe a sports psychologist and just kind of like getting his head right before the season would be a good thing for him too, because he seems like such a great guy, and he's talked about as being one of the nicest guys in the NHL. So you hate to see him like have his confidence shaken every time he lets one in.
Yeah, no, that's all true stuff. I'm just getting more worked up into the contract part because I felt like his
I hear you.
term and all that stuff like that. So, everything, speaking personally, the guy, he does seem like a great guy, great locker room person. So
Yeah.
if I can, I feel like I've been picking on Holland a little too much. If I could bring out a positive, because I do want to mix it up with some
Hmm.
positivity, but is I truly just, I don't know. I will give him all the praise in the world for the Ekholm trade, because that's the type of player that they needed. I feel like all
Yeah.
year long when I was picking on the Oilers, even before the season started or during the season, I kept saying to everybody, like, their blue line core is going to be the death of them. Like, that's going to be their, it's going to bring them down come playoff time. Like, their blue line core is their biggest weakness. Like, I know Campbell's been kind of hit or miss, but I feel like if they fix their defense, that can kind of almost fix Jack in the process, right? So
Well, I
when
wanted to bring in another defenseman, but while not losing Tyson Barrie, because he was such a vital part of one of, if not the best power play in NHL history. And the one benefit is that it's now opened the door for Evan Bouchard to step into that position, and that's what he was drafted to do. So you have this 23-year-old kid with a very high offensive ceiling, and he's getting the looks now, and his game has taken off since the trade. And I don't think that just has to do with having more opportunity to play with Tyson Barrie going to Nashville, but I think it also has to do with his D partner and Matthias Ekholm being a mentor for him, similar to how Duncan Keith was in his rookie year. So that has been a Matthias Ekholm, like I said, is having an impact on the team, not only with his play on the ice, but the effect that he's had on Bouchard.
Yeah, and I'll agree 1,000% there. Like, as much as I give Holland flack, I'll praise them till the end of the day about this Ekholm pickup,
Yeah.
because it's just, I feel like that's the type of player they needed. Like, I know losing Barry is a tough pill to swallow, but don't take this the wrong way. I feel like they have power play weapons and they already have offensive weapons. And at the same time, too, with Bouchard coming into his contract year and being around a few years now, I feel like, don't you want to challenge your young defenseman? Like, in a situation, don't you kind of want to give him the rope and be like, here's your opportunity.
Well,
Let's challenge you
yeah,
in a
there
contract
were
year. Let's see
fans
what you
who
got.
thought that. I agree, and there were fans who thought that Barry was blocking his path from the start. Looking back in hindsight now, I'm glad that Barry was there for that transitional period of sort of as like the stopgap until Bouchard was ready, because for 3 years in a row, he was a big part of this team offensively. Was on track for another 50-point season this year, which would have been, I think, the third of his career, third or fourth, and the first by an Oilers since Sheldon Surrey in 2008, 2009. I'm hoping Bouchard is going to get there next year, because after that 43-point rookie season he had with very little power play time, that gave me a lot of hope that this guy is going to, be a 60-point defenseman in the NHL. So now that he's getting the chance to play with this power play, it's just a matter of time, I think, before he breaks out.
Yeah, no, 100%. And I'm curious. This is a whole other topic, but I wonder what his contract's going to look like too this coming
I think
summer.
they might bridge him, but like they can't
Yeah,
bridge him multiple times. Like if they could get a 2-year deal for around $3 million, I think that's probably pretty good because right now he's making under $1 million on his entry level. And
Hmm.
now I'm sure his agent will be pushing for a bigger deal, and the Oilers can sort of counter with, well, it's like, yeah, he's playing better, but he's also a part of a historically strong power play, and that's going to boost the numbers a little bit too. So we'll see where it comes out. I think the bridge deal is probably the way they go now, and then hopefully look to sign him long term after that. But uh, just to finish up tonight, Jeff, we'll just go like I want to get a thought from you on McDavid. Obviously, I'm guessing that there might still be a little bit of disappointment there that he didn't land with the Sabres in 2015. But just a thought from what you've seen from him this year. I mean, he's been the best player in the world for 6 or 7 years now, but to actually be on a level where he's competing with, all-time great seasons and on this pace where he might hit 150 points, which we haven't seen in almost 30 years. I want to get a thought from you on McDavid specifically this year, taking his game to even a new level, and just how far you think the Oilers will actually go.
Yeah, 2015, that was a fun year, right? Buffalo was last place. I'll never forget that. But it was one of those situations where I'll never forget where and what I was doing when I found out. Like, I remember I was in Lethbridge, Alberta, with a bunch of Oilers friends, and I wasn't gonna get too cocky because I was like, just because they're last place, just because they have the best odds, doesn't mean Buffalo's gonna win, right? But of all teams, McDavid went to Edmonton, right? So, um, I will admit, for like the first few years, I was a little bitter because like I was like, he should be in a Sabres jersey, right? But
Every time you see him
it's
win a scoring title or hit 100 points, it was a hard
yeah,
pill to swallow.
yeah. But all time heals wounds kind of thing, right? And he's in his eighth
Yeah.
year now, and so I don't feel the same way as I did like 4 or 5 years ago, right? And now it's just kind of like the way I look at it is, well, I'm 35 years old, and I don't really have much memory of Gretzky in his heyday, in his prime, but
Yeah.
I'm privileged enough that I can see McDavid's pretty much his entire career unfold. And whether I'm an Oilers fan or not, I'm just a giant hockey fan. I'll watch hockey no matter the matchup, and just to see Connor McDavid in Edmonton and kind of have a front row seat to kind of the type of magic he's displaying this year, especially. It's just a privilege as a hockey fan to be able to just watch this, just marvel at this type of ability because, he's the type of player, and I'm sure you can agree, is that just when you think he's not gonna, when you think you've seen it all, he'll pull something out like, holy crap, I guess we haven't seen it all yet, and
Well, just
when you
look at the
think he,
playoffs last year. I mean,
yeah,
averaging over 2 points a game in the playoffs, and you thought this is as good as it gets. And then he comes out this season and he's taken it to even another level where he's going to very likely become, he's currently on pace for the first player since Mario Lemieux in 1995-96 to hit 150 points. And he could become the first player since Teemu Selanne and Alexander McGillney in 1992-93 to score 70 goals. I mean, these are things that a lot of people never thought they'd see again.
yeah, exactly. And it's kind of, something rare these days, right? And we should just really, as an Oiler fan, I hate to say it, but sometimes I feel like Oiler fans, like, they see it too much. You know what I mean? Like, I shouldn't say
Well,
see
you
it too much,
become
but like,
accustomed to it. Like,
yeah, that's a great way to put it. Yeah.
you just you get used to his greatness. Like, if you were to see another player around the league score one of the highlight reel goals he does, you might take a step back and say, "Wow, that was an incredible goal." But with McDavid, you just almost come to expect it. You see his highlight and like, "Oh yeah, that's a McDavid goal." And it's gotten to the point where it almost seems like if he has less than 3 points in a game, it's almost like he had an off night. Like, oh, what did he have tonight?
Yeah,
He
like
had a
what's wrong with him?
he had a goal. He had a goal and an assist. As a 2 point game. It's like, oh, that was kind of a slow night for him. Hopefully he'll pick it up next game, right? So it's just he's taken the bar so high. And look, I don't. I'm sure there's going to be another player like him that will come around down the road, but I don't know if I see in the next however many years a player dominating to this level who isn't just the best player in the league, but is literally lapping the field and this so far ahead of his competition.
Yeah, we got another Connor coming in the league next year, which I think he'll be he'll be like up there. He'll be a franchise player, but I
Yeah.
still don't think it'll be like McDavid level. The type of level and the status that McDavid's on. Like I don't think we'll see it for a long, long while.
No.
So just like I said, this is something that I've been saying this for a few years now, where it shouldn't really like if you're a Flames fan, fine, it might be a different story, but like it shouldn't matter what team you're a fan of. Like seeing McDavid play and watching him pull off the type of magic that he does. It's incredible, and
Yeah.
so it's just like I said, as a hockey fan as a whole, like even when he scores against even when McDavid scores against Buffalo like he just did last week, it's something like, man, that guy, you know what I mean? Like, oh, McDavid, right? And
No, I totally understand that. And just looking, if you had to bet on it, how far do the Oilers go in the playoffs this year?
ooh. See, that's I hate to sound like I'm pumping his tires too much, but I truly feel like Matthias Ekholm was going to make a big difference. He's been to the finals before with Nashville, and he's a type of veteran presence that I feel like the defensive defenseman that they've been kind of lacking. As for how far they go, the West is so wide open. I feel like the first round, it could be a tough matchup, but at the same time, the first round, it's going to be a close matchup no matter who they face. Even if they end up being the second wild card for some reason or a wild card team, they're going to have a close matchup no matter what. Oh, it's tough. I want to say that I think they're going to make it to the third round again.
Okay.
But even that, I don't see it surprising if they go to the finals. I don't think they're going to win it all, but I think the Oilers are definitely going to go to the final four or the finals. I just feel like they're more well-rounded. They're more balanced, with the addition of Ekholm and just Connor just producing the way he is. He's just on another level, So I feel like just with Connor scoring the rate he is, and just with the addition of Matthias Ekholm there, I think they're really going to go far this year.
Well, Jeff, I know you say you like to antagonize Oilers fans, including family member, but I think you made a lot of Oilers fans happy with that prediction right there, because getting to the final, man, would be just a huge step for this team. And I think in year 8 with McDavid, that's the time to get there. And I'm not saying they would be favored against Boston. In fact, I know for a fact that Boston would be the favorite, or any of the top teams out east, Carolina, whoever it may be. But I just get the feeling that the first chance that McDavid and Draisaitl get to play in a Stanley Cup final, they're not going to let it slip through their fingers.
Yeah, no, that's a good way to put it. And I think these coming playoffs will be it'll be an interesting storyline because there's so many powerful teams in the East like Boston or Carolina or New York or New Jersey, but I feel like they're going to probably beat the hell out of each other in the process. So they're not going to be 100% by the time they get to the finals, right?
Well, that's the thing. You hear people say things like, oh, Edmonton couldn't take out New Jersey, Carolina, Boston, Toronto. It's like they don't need to take out all the teams. They only need to beat one of them, right?
Yeah.
They only have to beat whichever one gets there. And if the Oilers do have a bit of an easier path, and those teams have to really slug it out for however many 7-game series between all these teams that are so close near the top of the standings, other than Boston, who's kind of separated, but that's just it opens the door for the Oilers to maybe play a team that's kind of run down by the time they get there. So anything could happen. But Jeff, I just want to say thanks again so much for joining me tonight and talking Sabres and Oilers and just all hockey in general. Once again, it was really cool to meet you last weekend at the Heavy Hockey Showdown in Edmonton. Just where can people follow you on Twitter?
Follow me at Ade780 on Twitter there. My last name and the area code. I thought of that really hard for that name. But
yeah, remember though, right?
Yeah, exactly. No, I've had the same name since like 2007. Like, geez, I've been on Twitter way too long. But no, that's where you can find me on Twitter there, Ade780. And as you mentioned earlier, I'm with Heavy Hockey there, and I've only spit out a few articles so far, but I'm looking to do more. And hopefully the sky's the limit for Heavy Hockey, more articles. So.
Absolutely. And I'm glad that I was the first one that got to read both of those articles, and very well written. So I'm looking forward to more from you in the future, and hopefully maybe we'll even have something this summer if the Sabres do acquire a few more pieces. It'd be good to get your thoughts on that.
I would love to, and I look forward to it again, like I said. And once again, Eric, I'm glad we got the chance to finally do this, and thanks for having me on.
That's awesome. All right, dude, have a good night.
Hey, thanks a lot. You too.
So for Jeff Ade, I'm Eric Friesen. This has been the 99 Forever podcast. We're out.